I think I think you learn best when you get stuck and then you try to figure out how to solve it. So what I do is I just make mistakes and show them these are the errors you're going to get and I'd fix it. It's actually funny because a lot of people think that, oh, she makes mistakes all the time. That's so hilarious. And I'm like, no, no, no. This is part of the teaching style where I make mistakes just to show you, okay, these are the errors that you're going to get. These are the bugs that you're going to come across. Everyone does. And this is how you fix it. And I think that really helps people as well because an educator can only teach so much, right? They can try to give you all the fundamentals, all the missing blocks needed to help bridge the gap for that specific concept. But when you get stuck, what really matters is you focus on, okay, now that I'm stuck, this is what basically how to debug and how I can sort of help there.
Ankita Kulkarni discusses the benefits and major hurdles of learning Next.JS, as well as strategies for teaching Next to beginners.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Ocel, the VP of Innovation at This.Labs. Today, we have a full house of co-hosts. We have Tracy Lee. Tracy, how are you doing today?
So good. So good to see everyone today.
We also have Adam Rackis. Adam, how are you doing?
Wonderful. Good to be here. Thank you.
Great. And of course, we've got Danny Thompson. Danny, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing well.
Great. Well, we're very excited to sit down today and talk with Ankita Kulkarni. She is a tech educator with over a decade of experience as an architect and as an engineering leader, and so much more. Ankita, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good.
We're going to be talking about a lot of different things today, especially talking about Next.js. But I think maybe just to get us warmed up, we introduced you as a tech educator, but you've worked in the industry for a long time and sort of just recently made that leap to becoming a full-time tech educator. I was just kind of curious if you kind of fill people in on making that journey and, how it's been for you for the last year and a half.
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks so much for asking. So after working in the industry for over a decade, I did a lot of stuff. I feel like I also grew pretty quickly in my career. So I was a senior dev, a solution architect, a senior engineering leader. And all this to say, it was really good to sort of level up and climb the ladder up until I stepped into a director role. And there I was like, I really caught myself being, hey, like, is this truly what I want to do? Or I'm just like climbing the ladder because that's what's expected out of everyone. So after taking that, I guess pausing there, I was like, no, I think I'm really passionate about teaching. And at that point, I was creating a course with a platform. And I just felt like I really wanted to enjoy that more. And I really wanted to focus on that more. So I decided to go full time. And I also felt like I did not want to climb the ladder anymore at that point. Maybe it might change in the future. Who knows? Because I always feel like it's a pendulum. You sort of go back and forth being a developer or a senior engineering leader and so on. But having said that, I decided to go full time. And so far, it's been really good. It was a lot of figuring out what I really should be focusing on, what I really love doing, what people want to hear, right? So all of that, it was a really fun journey so far.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? You're saying that you're like AI or Next.js, right?
Or maybe both.
There you go. Well, talk a little bit, I guess, about kind of now setting up education around Next.js. Like what is it that maybe other educators weren't doing or that people were struggling to learn that you've kind of found has been effective for people in learning Next? Like what are the big stumbling blocks?
Yeah, for sure. I guess like when I was working in the industry, I guess I'm still working, but like when I was working in a 9 to 5, I just found that there was a lack of practical knowledge. Like, okay, how do you do things in production with production ready apps, and not just talk about, okay, this is how the basics of a certain technologies are, but not just that, but also like, how do you dive in and give more practical examples as well. I felt like that was a gap that I felt with a lot of education content. A lot of educators definitely cover that, but I felt like there could be an angle where I could I could, I guess, fill the gaps where I could just come in and sort of, help with that and help bridge the practical knowledge there. Because I always took an approach whenever I was learning as well as a learner that, okay, this is great. For example, server actions in Next.js. They're great, but where do I use this? Are they ready for production? How do I scale with this? How will my customers get impacted? All those questions are not necessarily fully covered. So that's where I felt like as an educator, that was sort of my unfair advantage, like sort of coming in after working in industry and actually scaling apps and building them to actually teaching people how to do that as well. Because hey, I did it. Here's how I did it. I want to show you because all these technologies have changed so much over the years. So yeah.
I'm obviously big into the whole educating aspect. And so for me, there's definitely been some things that I've learned that help maybe students adopt or retain information in a certain way. Has there been certain things that you've noticed? Because I know this is not your first course. You have a previous course with that you've put out as well. But I mean, have there been certain methods or teaching ideas or techniques that you've learned that have maybe yielded better results as far as retention goes? But also when it comes to, I guess, this course being Next.js related, are you implementing some of those teaching methods in a way that will help, I guess, people get more accustomed to the techniques of Next.js?
For sure. I think like one of the ways I really like to teach is just through visual learning. I think we are all visual learners. Or I should say there are different types of learners, but a lot of us, when we see things, we can relate to it way more than just like reading about it in text form. So I think one of the ways is through visual learning. I like to draw diagrams, right? To draw a bunch of boxes, I should say. And drawing those boxes also really helps people connect the dots in their head and giving more practical examples like this is a technology or term that we heard. Let's remove the jargon and really understand, okay, how do we use this in your apps? How are users going to get impacted? And I always like to keep myself in, I would say, like this, the seat of a user and really try to understand, okay, these are the apps that we are building, a web app or mobile app, whatever might be, then what is the experience they are going to get and sort of backtrack that to develop to being a developer. Because I think that a lot of us, we can get really away with like a lot of different technology terms. There's so much out there. How do you cut the noise and really truly focus on what's truly important for your job? Because if you think about it, in today's market, a lot of people want to level up. They also want to keep their jobs. They want to make sure that with AI coming in play, things they can still retain their job, And I think that really helps with sort of helping them level up as well. So yeah.
Have there been any surprising difficulties as you transitioned into educator that you weren't like planning on, things that sort of caught you by surprise that you weren't expecting?
Everything. I would say that when I decided to go full time, I had an idea in my head that this is how it's going to execute. But I think it was just an idea after that. After you actually start doing the work, right? And I think that's where maybe just I feel like I love teaching and I love learning. And I think that also really helps there. But I think a lot of unexpected situations were just like, what did I really want to teach and really want to focus on? Because there's so much out there. Even I had to cut the noise to really figure out what I wanted to focus on. And I ended up, being in the front end world and sort of that has been my expertise. So I sort of decided to niche down there and like focus on technologies that are there. But even like starting a YouTube channel, if you asked me before, I guess like 2 years ago, you're gonna start a YouTube channel and teach people online, I'm gonna be like, no way, you are lying to me. There's no way I'm gonna do that. Not because I thought YouTube channels are not they're great source of education, and I consumed YouTube a lot over the years to learn and level up, but just the teaching felt so much easier via video for me versus like writing blogs about it or anything like that. So I think that is another lesson there. But I could go on and on about it. There's so many things I learned, but I think the biggest thing was like, how do you stay disciplined and really focus on what truly matters? I cannot be everything to everyone. I cannot be everywhere. And unfortunately, I cannot make everyone happy. But whoever I do make happy or whoever I do serve, I want to do a really good job with them. And that's what I really want to focus on.
How do you mix the specificity of the examples that you use with kind of like wanting to explain topics broadly? I feel like sometimes with Next, maybe uniquely, and I guess AI as well there to an extent, the difference between learning it and like applying it is wider than it has been, say, for just React by itself, or a particular library or particular methodology. I mean, everybody can remember back in school, right? The teacher would do it on the board, and you go, "That makes complete sense to me." You get to the very first homework problem, and you're like, "I don't even know where to start." And I feel like that comes up a lot with Next, where you read a blog or you watch a video and you go, "Oh, server components, that makes complete sense to me." And then you're like, "But wait a second, how do I do a shopping cart? Wait, can I cache authenticated data?" It's like all of a sudden real life gets in very quickly, but it can be hard to come up with those examples and make it a succinct video. So where do you strike that balance with those?
Yeah, for sure. I think, and that this is a reason why I create, I would say, two types of videos. One where I sort of take people from like zero to production. Like you can ship this app and deploy it to production, and I teach everything that you need to know about that specific technology. But on the other hand, people really get stuck in problems. Developers, I get stuck all the time. And I think it's important that when they Google, they are also able to come across content that really serves their needs at that specific point. So I think that is also another way to sort of only focus on specific topics. But I would say combining both of those and really trying to figure out, okay, in this specific video or for this specific topic, what is the most simple example I can create and how can I scale up to make it more complex? Okay, for example, we have a login form. That's great. This is how you build a login form. And because we spoke about server actions, that's an example that's coming to mind. Okay, how do we add server actions for this? But wait a second, how did we do it before? Like, what was life before server actions? So I would show an example of that and show, okay, this is what you do now, and this is how it changes. Now, what's the difference and what are the challenges you're going to come across? But having said that, I think you learn best when you get stuck. And then you try to figure out how to solve it. So what I do is I just make mistakes and show them these are the errors you're going to get, and I'd fix it. It's actually funny because a lot of people think that, oh, she makes mistakes all the time. That's so hilarious. And I'm like, no. This is part of the teaching style where I make mistakes just to show you, okay, these are the errors that you're going to get. These are the bugs that you're going to come across. And everyone does. And this is how you fix it. And I think that really helps people as well, because an educator can only teach so much, right? They can try to give you all the fundamentals, all the missing blocks needed to help bridge the gap for that specific concept. But when you get stuck, what really matters is you focus on, okay, now that I'm stuck, this is what basically how to debug and how I can sort of help there.
And I would say that is actually like the biggest thing, in my opinion, of what differentiates, a non-senior developer to a senior developer. Watching my friends debug is sometimes the most educational stuff, because I can debug with, let's say, a mid-level engineer and a senior level engineer, and the way they approach it, the things that they know to check for, just because the senior engineer has more experience, right? You're able to go 10 times deeper versus, a junior or a mid. You can only go so far in depth. So I love that as a teaching style.
For sure. And I think to add to that too, this is something that I would recommend to all developers, because I feel like I've grown so much because of this. If you can pair program with a senior dev, please do it. Just seeing them go through and debug problems together, you're going to learn so much more than just trying to fix it on your own. And I feel like that's how I grew as well. When I worked at IBM, a part of our culture was pair programming. and I paired with senior developers who had like 20 years more experience than I did. And I was like, wow, they see the same error that I do. And this is how I would fix it too, and which is exactly what they did. And that's how it was. I was able to like, boost my confidence there, right? Okay, they can do it. They are facing the same issue. So I can fix it too, which really help in career growth in general too.
Do you ever feel like you just know, you pair with enough, for me, I've paired with enough senior developers that I just know after I can pair with you for 5 minutes and I know what kind of developer you are and I know if you're good or not.
I would say that yes, that's true. But I feel like that's the fun part of, I guess, mentoring as well, right? And educating folks too. Which again goes back to education as well, right? Because that's where I learned, oh wow, like they are stuck in this. How can I help them? How can I teach them this concept? And then I would jump onto like Excali Draw or some draw.io tools and like, let me show you. And then they get it. There's that light bulb moment. And I guess back, a few years ago, we were all in the office. So you could see that light bulb moment. Now it's just an emoji, but yeah, it just really helps a lot.
All right. Well, before we continue, I just wanted to take a second to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs. This.Labs is a consultancy focused on helping companies with their digital transformation efforts. And that might sound like a buzzword, but what it means is helping companies align their business objectives with their digital efforts, whether that be replatforming, modernizing, or spinning up new projects. This.Dot has worked with companies like Stripe, Xero, Wikimedia, DocuSign, and Twilio. Check them out at thisdot.co. That's THISDOT.co. All right, now back to our show.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously a lot of our discussion has revolved around Next.js, which is great. And I guess I would love your take on, I think we can see over time Next.js's popularity has definitely grown tremendously. And there have been some vocal people that are not necessarily the biggest fans of it. I guess in your opinion, what makes it stand out from other frameworks like, other frameworks, I won't name any specifically, but other options?
I would say that I think Next.js being, I guess, the first adopter of like React, right? They adopted like React initially, and I think probably why a lot of, the controversy comes in play, right? Where people are like, oh my God, this is so frustrating and this and that. But we also need to remember that Next.js was the first framework that adopted all the latest like React stuff, React server components, and so on, and partnered with the React team on that to make it all happen. So I would say, to answer your question, I would say the biggest differentiator is that how easy it is to get set up. I know that on Get Started with Next.js, you are already in the React world because Next.js is a framework that's built on top of React. So I think it really helps you. It just boosts your productivity overall. And as a developer, if you want to get started, you can just use Next.js and let the framework do all of the heavy lifting. Now, having said that, you're definitely going to have a hard time, or I guess the transition that we are in right now. People who have learned React, love React, loved Create React app, and all the setup that we had there. There's so many cool apps that we have all built with React and so on. Now switching that to, and as we are transitioning to, I guess, more frameworks or any of that stuff, I think we are going to have maybe a harder time to change our mental model to making it server first compared to, I would say, someone who just learned React today. It's going to be way different for them now today compared to people who are transitioning as well. Because for them, just like, oh, this is how React works. It's server by default. And, and I think that's just going to help in general. But I would say, like, overall, the framework itself does a really good job at helping you focus on what truly matters, which is that you write React components, you are able to deploy your application very quickly, and so on. And because of all the additional components that already give you performance benefits out of the box, you just have to use them. And for developers who are starting out today, it's a lot easier because all you got to do is to make an image component performant as a start. I'm not saying all images will on Next.js websites are going to be performant, by default, but the fact that it gives you a starting point is really good for developers today. So I think that also makes Next.js, one of the powerful frameworks. But having said that, I'm gonna give it a it depends answer, because if your organization cannot be they cannot be moved to Next.js for whatever reason, and you already, I don't know, you're an Angular shop and you feel like you have a content heavy website, and I think moving to Astro makes more sense for you, or moving to Remix makes more sense for you because of the setup that you have, then you should do that. Because I feel like what's really powerful in today's world is that we have so many good frameworks. So make sure what your use case is, and accordingly pick the right framework for your use case. For example, not everyone has to adopt Next.js. Not everyone has to adopt all the other frameworks as well, for instance, right? So I think it really matters what your use case is. And if you're a consulting firm, then what your clients want, and so on, and go from there.
I have a take. I don't think I've done a take like this before, and I could be wrong. I'm very open to ideas on this one.
God help us.
I personally think that the React documentation, having Next.js being the default, has hurt developers that are learning to code. And the reason why is they're not just having to learn React now, they're trying to learn Next at the same time. And I think that's a big distinction why Ankita's course is not a React course, but a Next.js course, is because it's two separate things. So now they're having to learn two different tools, or a framework or a library and another framework on top of each other to now know what's going on. Because they're going from HTML, CSS, and an app.js file to now learning what components are and how they can utilize that for their being, what are pages, and it's like all these new areas that are just coming at them at one time. But then you kind of said something, which is something that I hear very often, just let the framework do the work. Well, that level of abstraction now makes it harder for them to visualize or understand what's actually happening. And so they just get into this trust by default mode of like, I did it in this and I don't know why it's not computing the way that I need it to compute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good take. And I definitely agree with that as well. I think the React docs updating Next.js and, adding Vite later on and other frameworks too, definitely can be a, controversial take, and also something that developers that are new, they have to learn so many things. But I have met two types of developers. One type is basically like, I don't know where to start. I don't know. Even if you start with Vite, for example, which is also recommended in the React docs, they also have their own like router that you can add on top. There's also all these other things that you could add on top. And by default, yes, you could update the simple file, but very quickly you want to move into additional things, because that's how the front end world has changed a lot, right? They are gonna hear about server components and they want to dive into that right away. And I think that's where I guess the mental model needs to shift a bit, for sure. But I totally hear you that there's so many things they have to learn. Earlier, it was just React, and you just focus on React. And once you get really good at it, then you add the framework and so on. So I think depending on the type of developer you are, you have to accordingly start. And I also created a video on this too, that I think it's really important that you just focus on Vite with React first and then add the framework. So you truly learn React and so on. But a lot of developers, I was at React Rally, and they had watched that video, which was quite interesting to meet quite a few of them. And they mentioned that they don't have an opinion yet. They don't know what's good. So having a framework give them a base really makes them feel a lot more comfortable compared to like starting with just plain, even with Create React App, for example. It was too simple, for example. So I think like depending on your learning style and the type of developer you are, I think maybe the React docs need to be tweaked a little bit, or educators need to do a better job at laying down the options that this is what you need to do. But yeah, I think I do find that when you're transitioning from the existing React world to a framework, I think that's where a lot of the, I feel like challenges happen because I face challenges too. I'm like, oh my God, I need to re-architect my entire application for server components and server actions. But yeah.
I think the criticism is valid, but I don't think we can blame the React docs. I think the standards have just risen quite a bit. So like even if you're on Vue, I don't touch Vue at all. I have nothing against it, but I'm guessing the Vue folks are more and more coupled to Nuxt. If you're a Svelte person, more and more you're going to be building your life around SvelteKit. The whole web dev world just went full stack really quickly, and now you kind of need these server frameworks attached at the hip. So life has gotten harder for beginners, and I don't envy them or the people trying to educate them.
But I also feel like things have gotten a little bit easier, right? Because if you look at just generally the React ecosystem and what you had to do prior without using a framework like Next, then there was so much more. And you rewind a few years ago, there was all this conversation about, oh, now I need to be an accessibility expert. Now I need to be a performance expert. Now I need to be a like a DevOps expert, whatever it was. But with Next providing so many things out of the box, it makes it just so much easier, right? It's kind of abstracting away. I don't want to say that we don't have to know about performance, but there are a lot of things again that are kind of taken care of for us, which is really nice.
It makes it easier for the senior engineers who already know what they're doing, but the poor person trying to learn that is, I think, who Danny was targeting. Like they're just dropped in the middle of this gigantic abstraction inside of an abstraction. And now they're a little bit lost potentially. But yeah, life's better for me with Next and everyone in this room.
Well, it's back in the day too, right? With things like Ember, any of the ones that were more convention based than configuration based, I think those ones were always interesting ones for people to learn as their first one, because it both lowers the initial bar because there's just a lot of things you don't have to know, but it also maybe makes it harder on the back end, because not the back end of development, but on the backside of learning, because all of a sudden you realize certain things just were magic. They actually replaced other things and you needed to learn to scratch below the surface. So I don't know if it doesn't serve people to learn Next.js out of the box, but I do think it puts even more weight on people to eventually backfill an understanding of the challenges that the framework is actually solving for you, just so that you can appreciate what you have. Because I mean, how many conversations do you guys get into nowadays where somebody's adopting Next and they're like, well, which database should I use? Which this should I use? Which that should I use? Which is best? And I think we're back into that world of thinking like there's a one way to solve everything, because Next grabbed a giant bunch of it and said, here you go. There, I did it all that for you. But, and Kate, I know you're putting out stuff all the time. And, even now you're like, it's using Next and it's using Tailwind and it's using Clark and it's using this and it's using that. So it's like, even with Next.js packaging so much, you still got to go out and grab 5 or 6 other things to ship anything substantially.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree with like the full stack take as well that Adam was talking about, that, I think the bar has definitely risen for a lot of developers just to learn so many of these technologies. Even like in boot camps these days, they start off with server components right away now. They don't wait for, a lot of the other technologies. At least here in Toronto, I've seen quite a few boot camps doing that. So I totally agree. But also, I would say that even React Native has, started recommending Expo by default as a framework.
Yeah, Expo swallowed it all.
Yeah. So like that's the other thing too. So I feel like the reason why it's happening too is because I feel like if you just start React Native on its own, it can be painful, for example. But with Expo, a lot of things are just done for you. So even as Tracy was mentioning, you can just figure it out. You can just get started. You don't have to then, do a lot on your own. And maybe initially it will be like, wow, there's so much magic that just happens for me. I don't understand how all of this is done. And when you slowly start to level up, that is when you start asking why and like how all of this is done. And you can sort of dive deep into a lot of this stuff as well.
I think that's a really good distinction too, though, because I think the reason why a lot of these different technologies are starting to recommend framework first is because they want the happy path. What's the happy path to get somebody successful immediately? Because that is going to increase adoption, right? The faster you can get somebody up and running, make something successful, build on top of it, then the more people are going to be using your technology. Also, I don't know if people do this or think about this, but if you recommend a framework, then maybe your repo will be less clogged with tickets and issues and bugs and troubleshooting, and it all goes to the venture funded startups that are associated with these frameworks.
As we wind down, I would love to ask Ankita, as someone who's like on the tip of the spear on Next, what are you most excited about with some of the newest Next features that you've seen? What are you most excited to share with devs who've maybe used Next before?
I would say that a lot of the features that I'm really excited about are just like improvements in general in the framework for better error handling, error messaging. I know this is not a typical answer you would hear. People would talk about React 19 and all the exciting stuff that's coming out, but that's definitely all the React stuff. But I would say just make the overall performance of the framework as well that's coming up. I think there's a next conf very soon. So I'm excited to see all the performance changes there as well, better error messaging, error handling as well. But overall, I'm also quite excited to some of the hooks that even come from React. I'm definitely quite excited for them to get stable as part of React 19 as well. And some of the additional, I should say, I believe SEO changes as well that are coming up too. That's also something that I'm really excited about. There's so much I'm excited about. I think as an educator, this is such a good opportunity for me because there's so much confusion out there about not just Next.js, but a lot of the questions that we discussed today, right? What framework to adopt, how to adopt, and all of those things. And I think I'm excited about teaching all of that to help bridge the gap in the knowledge, because I think that's really exciting to me as well, on top of all the new technology changes that are coming up.
I'm super fascinated to see the future of OpenNext, because Next and Vercel have been so intertwined, and I'm super fascinated to see if that can have success. What comes out of that? Because I'm assuming, especially as an educator, that's got to be difficult, because Vercel really does make shipping Next very straightforward, and it's one of the key offerings there. But the idea of then having to teach people, how do I deploy Next now on our existing AWS stack or on our this stack or that stack, is going to get very interesting. But I'm also curious to see, once you divorce the two, if Next is as appealing of a solution outside of Vercel than it is tightly woven.
I'm really glad you mentioned this, actually, because I think one of the maybe things that Next.js can overall improve upon is like the deployment platform choice, for example, by default. I love Vercel. All my products are on Vercel. It's so easy to get started and get going. It's really good. But with things like open initiatives like OpenNext, it's so much better because now you can deploy Next.js very seamlessly anywhere else. Having said that, there are so many companies who have figured that out and deployed Next.js, so it's not like you can't, but I feel like the path to adoption, like Tracy was mentioning, I think people will adopt the frameworks faster if, the adoption is, it's like right away, right? Instant. And a lot of people choose Vercel is because of that. So I'm really excited about OpenNext and the work that's being done there for the deployment to be a lot simpler, just like as easy as clicking a few buttons and getting going, because no one wants to dive into Docker files. Maybe I'm speaking for myself, but that they definitely give me nightmares. But yeah.
Oh, that's as good a place as any to leave it. Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this Modern Web Podcast. Thank you to our guest, Ankita. As always, we say the conversation does not stop here. You can find us online. You can find Ankita online at Kulkarni, Ankita9. So that's KULKARNIANKITA, and then the number 9. You can find me online at Robocell. You can find Tracy online at Lady Leet. Adam, you can find online at Adam Rackis, and Danny at D Thompson Dev. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. And as we close out, we'd like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This. Is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at this.co. One last time, that's THISDOT.co. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.